Yum, yum!
Greetings, Motonauts. Today, let's take a look at a cool little kit by Bernd and Moller called Script Shelf. And Script Shelf will put your scripts on a shelf, as you may have guessed from the title. So head over here to this URL and download Script Shelf, and then unzip the zip and drag that Script Shelf folder over to your kits folder, which is located here on the PC and here on OS X. And I have no idea on Linux, because I guess there is a Linux version of Modo, but I don't know anybody who uses it. All right, so we've got that in there. Now, when you load Modo up, you're going to see a cool little icon here with this little orangey script-looking icon. And just as a note, this toolbar here is called the Modo Modes toolbar, I think initially because it had the modes here. And it's sort of become the default place for kits. So if you remember Quick Locators in Volume 1, there's that kit. This is called the tail. It's sort of the end of this Modo Modes list of items, right? And so most kits tend to find themselves on the tail of the Modo Modes toolbar. And if you click the Script Shelf button, you'll see this come up, and you'll see some default items in there. So this is a palette, so you can hit tilde and go on, toggle it on and off, which is nice. You can keep it open and just toggle it if you want. And so let's click one of these guys, see what happens. Click New Window, and boom, we got a new window. Not super useful, but I guess it's working. Let's do new layer. I would probably call this new mesh item if it were me, but let's just say new layer. And there's a new empty mesh item and delete item, and it deleted it. Okay, so stuff is working. If that is not working, then you can stop the video and go do something else because you messed everything up. But anyway, it seems to be, that should be working. So before I sort of delve into this a little bit and show you how to add scripts, let's just kind of take a look at how scripts work really quickly in Modo. So let me add another empty mesh item here. And there's a couple ways to launch scripts, right? So we can go over here to System. In fact, let's just take a look and see where scripts are kept, first of all. So open User Scripts folder. And this is going to be in the same directory, this roaming Loxology directory that your kits are in, right? So there's my Script Shelf kit. Go up one, and here's my scripts. And this is where all my scripts are located. So nice. So that's where my scripts are. I've downloaded a few that I like to use. However, when you go up to System to run a script, you say Run Script. It takes you to the asset directory, which there's no scripts there. There ain't no scripts. So that's not very helpful. And to get back to the script folder, you've got to go C, Users, Greg, App Data, which, by the way, is typically hidden, so you might not even see that there. Roaming. Then we went through this last time. Loxology, no longer a company for the last 4 years. So Foundry needs to fix this, and then you can finally get to your scripts and run a script. Delete empty layers, and then the empty layer is gone. So that's one way to do it, but it kind of sucks, as you can see. So let's take a look at our command history here by dragging it up. And you'll see this command, delete empty layers. Let me just sort of drag this out a tad, and you can see this is the command for launching that script, right? So at, and then the path, C users, blah, 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 scripts, and then delete empty layers.py. Let's delete everything there, but the at sign and delete empty layers, and just keep it there for a second and add a new empty layer, empty mesh item. This whole layer terminology goes back to early Lightwave days when they called geometry items layers, and they were sort of layer-ish. And in Modo, this is a little Modo history. If you drag the item list collapse it all the way down. This is sort of reminiscent of how the old light waves used to work. So that's a bit of Modo's heritage, but they're really, the correct nomenclature is mesh item, because these are all items. That's an empty mesh item. But if I want to delete it, I can just do at and then type the name of the script. I don't have to type the whole path. Modo's automatically going to search in the default path, so I can run that and it gets rid of the empty mesh item. But the problem with scripts is they're hard to remember the names. They're always spelled weird. Like, look at this again. We've got the capital or lowercase d, the capital E, the capital, and whatever. Programmers have their own special way of naming things. Oftentimes the name of the script has the guy's initials in it or something. You don't remember them. So that's just not the best way to launch a script either. So that gives rise to why Script Shelf is important. A couple things about Script Shelf. It's only going to launch sort of fire and forget scripts. So a script that's going to iterate through a couple commands or something like that. It won't launch a script with arguments. So A script with arguments, something, if this has arguments, we'll say delete empty layers. Maybe there's an argument that you could type in to say, that only begin with the letter A or something like that. So an argument is sort of a variable that the script is going to take when it runs it, and it's going to alter the way the script runs. Some scripts have arguments. You're not going to be able to do scripts with arguments on a script shelf. It just fires the script. You're also not going to be able to run scripts that are really more of a kit, scripts that have their own user interface, scripts that have their own config files or UIs. Those aren't going to be working as script shelf either, and I'll show you why exactly and how script shelf works. It doesn't make script shelf not usable, because most of those scripts are really going to wind up as kits like these, right? So these are sort of kits where you can run particular scripts from. Script shelf is for that handful of really useful fire and forget scripts that you like to use, and also macros, which I'll show you in a minute. So to add a new script to script shelf, let's go back and open up our user scripts folder. There we go. And here is a useful script called SL Explode. Now, I know it's called SL Explode because it was written by Simon Lundberg, great guy, works at the Foundry, puts his initials on a script. That's fine. Lots of people do it. That MM, that's probably some guy's name that starts with MM. But it's not the most useful name. So if I left mouse click and drag this, whoops-a-daisy, left mouse click and drag this over to the script shelf and let go, it's going to ask me if I want to rename the script. And I would like to, because SL Explode doesn't mean a lot to me, although Mesh Explode does, or Mesh Splode, if you like to say it that way. All right, Mesh Explode. Hit OK. So there's Mesh Explode. So what just happened, you might ask? And I will tell you. So let's go back to that window. So there's our script, SL Explode. Let's pop back over to the kits. And here we have script shelf. Let's dig in here, data, Python scripts. And here you'll see something called Mesh Explode, the thing I just added. And what script shelf just did essentially is it copied SL Explode and renamed it over here and copied it over here to the Python scripts folder. So now I have really two different scripts. I have the original SL Explode over in my script folder right there. And then I have in my kit folder, I have the copied and renamed version of that called Mesh Explode. And that's fine. That's good, because I could do things like right click. And if I delete this script, it just removes the script from the kit directory. It leaves my original SL Explode script alone, the one in my user scripts directory. So you don't have to worry about actually losing scripts. It just deletes it from the script shelf here, which is nice. There's some other options. You can rename the button. You can remove the button, which will keep the script in the kit directory, the copied script, but it won't. It'll take it off of the list here. And you can change the icon, and also remove the icon and just have text button there. Oh, that's good. Also cool, you can middle mouse drag to rearrange these. So if I want delete item down here or new window at the bottom, it can do that as well. So that's pretty cool. And then, scripts, honestly, most scripts, it seems like, are modeling scripts or rigging scripts. And the really common scripts, good modelers or riggers, will put those on specific hotkeys or pie menus. But there's a lot of scripts that you don't use all the time that are still important, but you forget the name of them. And sometimes, honestly, you forget they even exist because you don't see them. They're off hidden in that scripts directory. So just having them here on the script shelf reminds you that these tools exist and you can use them. But what about macros, you may ask? Macros are super useful. They're just a series of commands. A lot of people like me who don't really script will create macros for certain situations. And it'd be nice to add macros to the script shelf, which you can in sort of a roundabout way. And there's a sample here that we can use to see how to do that. I should also note that I'm pretty sure script shelf only works with Python scripts. So Perl scripts aren't going to work. So a lot of scripts initially created with MODO way back in the 1, 2, 3 days were Perl. This is before Python was supported. So some of the old scripts are Perl scripts. Maybe bug Bernd and he can get Perl scripts to work, but right now it's just working with Python scripts as far as I could tell. Okay, macros. What do macros do? So I'm going to Control N to create a new scene here, and that's going to say bye-bye to my sweet pulse rifle. And let's just fire this macro and see what happens. Click, and what happened? We got a bunch of primitives, okay? I'm going to drag up the command history here, and we can see that it ran this macro over in the script shelf. So let's take a look at our kits and script shelf, and data and Python scripts, and here it says macro. So that's the one we just ran that made all these primitives. And what is that? So let's right click and let's right click on the macro guy and click edit, bring up Notepad, and we'll see that it ran a number of macros, right? But they don't have names. They just have this sort of string of numbers here. And that's how MODO keeps track of macros internally, probably as a way to let you name them whatever you want. So you don't have to name them without spaces or any sort of illegal characters. You can just name them what they want and what you want. But it gives them this numeric code. Okay, that's my assumption at least. But we can see that there's something useful here we can use with macros. So let's delete these guys here and drag this down and delete these. Let's sort of take a look and see how we can figure out how to get that number to launch a macro. So over here in commands, command history, remember you just pull up your command history from the bottom. And over here, not commands, but I'm sorry, scripts. If you ever want to see all the commands in MODO, they're all right here. There's a lot of them. Over in scripts and macros config. So these are actual macros that are embedded in the MODO config file. So they exist within the MODO config file. You can save new macros to the config file, and they'll persist in there when you relaunch MODO. A lot of these are just are macros that are built into MODO that MODO uses for various commands. Let's take a look at unit cube right here. That's one of those guys that launched, it looked like. So I just clicked it, and remember that everything in MODO is a command. So just the act of clicking and selecting the unit cube macro was actually a command, and I can see that command over in the command history. So if I go down here, I could see the select script command, right? And this is the fired name and arguments, and we can see that this macro script service, that bunch of numbers and macro there, that looks familiar. If we look at this guy again, that's what we have, right? So let's see, this is that 32357. Yeah, right here. So here's that unit cube one right here that we had selected. That's what's firing. So, okay, so we know how to fire macros that are embedded in the config file. So let's take a look at how to do that in sort of a practical example. Let me go back up here to this scene. I'm going to drag this guy down a little bit. This is an imported CAD file. So this comes from SolidWorks. And oftentimes, not oftentimes, but all the time when you bring in files from SolidWorks, you get these gray icons here, this sort of gray mesh icon. And what that is, it's a static mesh or a trisurf. And what is this? It's a sort of more efficient form of geometry that's not editable. So back when the SolidWorks importer was created, CAD files can be really big. And initially this was just for rendering. We're just rendering CAD files in MODO. And so we didn't bring in all the geometric data as regular mesh items. They were brought in as these trisurf, these static mesh items, because they use less memory. But unfortunately, they're also quite a bit slower in the viewport. And I don't know if that's a bug or just a repercussion of the structure of the static mesh item. Whatever it is, they're slower. So when I load up a SolidWorks file, I don't really need to save on memory. All my computers have tons of memory. So I like to convert all of those guys to regular mesh items. And the way you can do that is you can select, so you don't want to have to manually select all of these static mesh items in here because they're mixed in with all instances and all kinds of other stuff, right? Lights, things like that. So you want to select them all at once. And how may you do that, you may ask? So let's take a look. We'll use our command history here. And we're going to launch a command in MODO called select. And let's say item types. And we will do mesh instances. And so what that did is it selected all mesh instances, right? So we want the same thing, but we want it to select all mesh static meshes. And so here you can see the command, select dot item type mesh inst. And what we want to do is, I'm going to deselect everything. We want to select the static meshes. They're actually called trisurfs. And it's a little more convoluted to go back and find out what they're called, but I just happen to know they're called trisurf. So if I type in trisurf like that, hit enter, it's going to select all those guys. Okay, so that's useful to me because I want to then right-click and change type to a mesh. And now they're all meshes. And you see that it also left some empty tri-surfs as well. So empty mesh items as well. So that's like a sequence of events I go through every time I load up a SolidWorks file. And so there's got to be a better way to do this, right? So why don't we undo that, and we're going to make a macro. So let's make a macro. And I'm going to use script shelf here to make a new window. And this is sort of a hidden little feature of MODO. This window, right now, this window is just a blank slate, right? It has no... there's nothing in it, and there's different types of windows in MODO, right? There's application windows, there's editor windows, there's utility windows, there's property windows. What we want is a form view. A form view is a certain type of window in MODO. So if we go to form view, we can right-click on the toolbar here, and we can pick which form view we want. So click here, and you see all these different form views, right? So you'll see paint commands and modeling commands. And in here, you will see something called the macro recorder. And you click on the macro recorder, and that, I think, will load up. Now it'll load up. So we've got the macro recorder in here, and which is a kind of a cool little thing, which you probably haven't heard of. But it's there. So normally when you record a macro, I think you actually have to go to System and record macro from here. But this has a nice little, somebody's actually took the time to make a form with all these commands in there. It's just sort of hidden in MODO. So now that you know that, we know we can start recording a macro right here. So I'm going to go hit record macro. And then it's going to record every command in sequence from here. So if you remember, my command for, whoops, let me move this, was select dot item type tri-surf. And that, hit return, is going to select all the tri-surfs. So that command I just launched, my command I just executed, I'm sorry, is now part of the macro that I'm recording. And if I right-click in here and say change type to meshes, that command has now been added to the macro. So I'm going to do a couple of things here. One, I'm going to say store and config. We can stop recording. And I'm going to say store and config. We'll give this a name. We'll call it convert static mesh to mesh. And remember, we can call it whatever we want. We don't have to worry about illegal characters because MODO is going to give this a sort of numeric code as the name. So convert static mesh to mesh. That seems to make a lot of sense to me. Hit OK. And then I'm going to save this to a file just so you can kind of see what a macro file looks like. So let's put this in the scripts directory. Macros have an LXM extension. So let's say again, convert mesh to, static mesh to mesh dot LXM. All right, so successfully saved. So we got a couple things here. I saved that because I just wanted to show people who aren't familiar with macros what that looks like. So let's go to our scripts folder. And here's my macro, right? So let's take a, whoops, I don't want to rename it. I just want to open it. So you can see that was just two commands, right, in sequence. The select item type tri-surf command and the item set type mesh locator command. So I selected all the tri-surfs and I changed them into meshes. Okay, we close that. But also you'll notice over here in scripts, that command, that macro we just made, is now existing right here. Convert static mesh to mesh. And if you remember, if I just select that guy and I go to history, it's going to show me that code right there, right? So let me highlight that and copy it. And I'm going to go back. I'm just going to undo what we did here so we can show you how this macro works. So now we're back to a bunch of static meshes. I don't need my macro recorder anymore. And I'm going to go over to, let's close our script shelf. I'm going to go over to my scripts, Flexology, go back to my kit folder, my script shelf folder, my data folder, my Python scripts folder, and there's that initial sort of macro sample script, right? So let's copy and paste that guy. Let's give it a new name. Let's call it convert static mesh to mesh. All right. And right-click edit. Okay, so these are those primitive macros that we just looked at a little bit ago. I'm going to get rid of those. And let's just actually, before I do that, let's take a look at I'm going to paste what was in MODO. Whoops. I am going to paste, copy, and paste what was in MODO. So here is the convert static mesh to mesh macro that we made. So I'm going to cut that. I'm going to get rid of all these other little macros that make primitives, those little samples, and I'm going to paste my conversion macro right there. Okay, file, save. Now I took that sort of sample macro Python script I had, and I just copied it, pasted it, renamed it, and changed the macro that's going to be launched. So when I open up my script shelf here, you can see I've got my convert static mesh to mesh, and I'm telling you, be verbose when you describe things, because you don't want to call it some weird sort of scripty name that you can't remember what it does. So if I click this, it should run the macro, which should select all these static meshes and then convert them to meshes. And boom, that's what it did. And you'll also notice I've got a bunch of empty layers here. Well, what's a quick way to get rid of that? Well, I think I have a delete empty layers script. So let's go over to Lexology, scripts, delete empty layers. I'm going to drag that over here. And we'll just call it, I don't like del empty layers. I want to call it delete empty layers. Now I didn't put any underscores in here, but Script Shelf was smart enough to do that for me. So drag this down, delete empty layers, click that, and there goes all my empty layers. So that, I think, is a practical example of why you would want to use Script Shelf. You can do what I just did very quickly. Now these buttons are always here. I don't have to manually select all these static meshes, manually convert them, and then manually dig out all the empty layers and convert and delete those. I just have these two little buttons. So that is Script Shelf, and also sort of a deep dive into, not a deep dive, shallow dive into scripts and macros and kind of how MODO works with that stuff. And yeah, download Script Shelf. Bye.